So this is the last part of the chart that I have not gone over yet, and I wasn't going to go over it, but of course I got a question about it naturally, so here we are going over it. Just to say that the majority of the feasts of the Lord are pointed out in here. Unintentionally, like I didn't purposely do that, but because they all point to specific dates upon which Christ did and was important things, then naturally they're going to show on here. The Feast of Trumpets, where everyone thinks is still outstanding to be the next thing fulfilled somehow, sometime, some way, was already fulfilled. It is a memorial of the blowing of trumpets. That is how the feast was labeled in Leviticus 23. It was to be a memorial, meaning it was memorializing something that had already happened. On the date of Tishri 1, it was memorializing the first day of creation on Tishri 1, 4003 BC, when the trump began to speak creation into existence, Jesus having the voice of the trump. So if that's what it was memorializing in Leviticus 23, and then obviously the law having a shadow of good things to come, pointing to the image or the body of Christ, it was the ministry of Christ. This is answered in Hebrews 1:1. God, who at sundry times and in diverse manners spake in time past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son, by whom also whom he appointed heir of all things, and by whom also he made the worlds. So Feast of Trumpets was the forward looking to the incarnation of the Creator God, whose ministry served to sound the trumpet. He had the voice of the trumpet. So inherently that is written here on day one of creation. To begin the world, the trump of God spoke creation into existence, and then it was memorialized into the law as a remembrance or a memorial of that day. And then forward looking to the incarnation of the Creator God, Jesus Christ, whose ministry sounded the trumpet. And then you have the beginning of that ministry on Tishri 10, the Day of Atonement, which is Leviticus 25:9. Thou shalt cause the trump of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month in the Day of Atonement. You shall make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. That was as a result of having become the scapegoat, having the sins of Israel laid upon his head so that he could proclaim Jubilee, which is liberty via the forgiveness of sin. This was Luke 4. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He hath sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance unto the captives, the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. So on that date and from that date forward, he was the scapegoat, proclaiming Jubilee and sounding the trumpet until he went to the cross on Passover to shut up the works of the law and to institute the new covenant. Became the bread of life, which is what unleavened bread is forward looking to, or for what the Feast of Unleavened Bread was all about. And then he ascended 40 days at Feast of First Fruits. Then 3 days later is when he rose. And then he ascended 40 days after that. And then Pentecost 10 days after that sent the Spirit. So the only one missing out of there, out of all of the data points that we give, to outline how Christ fulfilled legally all of these feasts, is tabernacles. And, well, that goes back to the day he was born. Right here. From creation, which was Tishri 1, the first time the trumpet sounded, 4003 BC, to Tishri 15 of approximately 6 BC. That is why tabernacles, well, in John 1:14, the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. Dwelt is the Greek word skenu, which means to have my tabernacle. He dwelt among us. We beheld his glory. Glory is of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And if you look at how the Feast of Tabernacles is laid out in the law, the first day is a solemn assembly, and then the 8th day is a solemn assembly. The first day because Jesus was born on that day, and the 8th day because that was the circumcision, where he took on him the seed of Abraham, because it was required of all Jews born of the seed of Abraham to be circumcised according to the law. And then Hebrews 2 explains that verily he took not on himself the nature of angels, but he took on him the seed of Abraham. He came as a Jew for the purpose of redeeming the Jews, they rejected him, and so he went to the cross and shut up the covenant given to the Jews, instituted a new covenant, and invited Gentiles to participate. So just to point out that just about all of the data points on here, well, all of the main points on here correlate to fulfilled feasts that people are still in part looking for. So you've got Feast of Trumpets right back here at the start. And then again, forward looking to the ministry of Christ, which actually occurred in the 3.5 years between Tishri 1028 AD and Nisan 1032 AD. That was the incarnation of the Creator God sounding the trumpet. But the Creator God was born on the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, began his ministry on the Day of Atonement, and then again that ministry sounded the trumpet all the way till Nisan 10. 4 days later, he becomes the Passover and becomes the bread of life for everyone. And then 3 days later, he becomes the first fruits of the dead. And then 50 days after that, he sends the Spirit on Pentecost. So all of the feasts are on here in some way, shape, or form, with the exception of, because I mentioned Pentecost up here. Oh, I don't have the cross on here. Well, that's dumb. That's very dumb of me. Nisan 14 obviously should be on here. But Atonement's on here, and Tabernacles is on here, and Trumpets is on here too. So just to point that out. But the last piece of this, and I kind of want to back up, because this is really how, when I research timelines and things like that, I don't start at the beginning, I start at the end and back up to get to the beginning. Usually, well, I don't know. Usually that's how I do things, because for some reason I like to start at the bottom and work backwards. I don't know why. Like, my brain's kind of backwards like that, maybe. I don't know. But maybe it's because of having researched all of this already, and this is what I went over in the last video, which is the reign of Artaxerxes. All you have to do is pull up the Persian historical record, and it'll tell you that Artaxerxes I Longimanus, who was the Artaxerxes mentioned in Nehemiah 2, began his reign on August 11, 465 BC. The 20th year of his reign respective to the start of the first 69 weeks of years, the start of any of the 70 weeks at all, but the start of the first 69 weeks of years specifically, is pinpointed to March 14th, 445 BC. And then, as I went through in the last video talking about the day count versus the year count, it takes you to April 6, 32 AD, which is Nisan, in the month Nisan of the 20th year of the reign of Artaxerxes, to Nisan 10 triumphal entry was an even 69 periods of 7. So when you start at the correct spot, which is just going to a historical record, and you count in the method given by Daniel and Revelation also to describe the last week of years, you know it's a 360-day year that we're using to count these periods of 7. And again, I talked about why we don't immediately convert to years. We convert to days and then say from point A to point B, we need to see this amount of days. And then you can convert it to our calendar, which was not used when the prophecy was given. It is used now, and it's more recognizable to us, sure, but you can't start there because that's not what Daniel was using. You have to use what Daniel was using, and then you can convert it to something that we would recognize, which is why there's only 476 years between these two dates, not 483 years like some would expect, because he's not using a 365-day calendar. He's using a 360-day calendar. That is what the entirety of the prophecy uses, the 70th week included. So, already went through that. But because we can start from this point and we can use the count that Daniel gave us to arrive at an end point, there's little room for that to change. There would be no reason other than some kind of other motivation because someone doesn't like the way it worked out or doesn't like where it started or believes that it should have started from a different reference point. People can have whatever other opinions they want, but if you're literally just looking for this guy reigned in this year, the 20th year was this year, Daniel told me to count this much, here's my answer. Okay, so that's what that is. So I'm sorry if it's not 30 AD or 33 AD, as some people would expect. 32 is the answer. So we bring this over here and we say, okay, Jesus ended his ministry on Nisan 10 of 32 AD, April 6, 32 AD to be exact. If we back that up 3.5 years, then we would expect to see the beginning of his ministry on Tishri 10, from Nisan 10, 3.5 years back to Tishri 10. That's an even 3.5 years. And then 28 AD. Does that match with what we're told? Well, yes, it does, because Luke 3 tells us that John the Baptist, who was 6 months older than Jesus, which we find out in Luke 1, began his ministry in assumedly the spring of Nisan 10, the spring of the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius, which is 28 AD. So you go to a historical record, and some say, well, Tiberius was co-regent with his father for 2 years before he started reigning on his own. But that doesn't work with the information that we already found over here, so it needs to be dismissed. Just because people say that it started in 12 AD, that's not true for the purpose of this, because that wouldn't match. So what we're looking for is alignment. We're not looking for things to throw off unless they legitimately throw it off, and then we're looking for those things. But if you start at the right spot for everything, it's all going to work out. And simply because it doesn't reflect what you think it should doesn't mean it's wrong. Okay? Just want to put that out there. It also doesn't mean it's right. There are common thoughts for a reason. But specifically with regard to the years of the crucifixion, people say 30 or 33 simply because of signs in the heavens. The period of darkness for 3 hours during Nisan 14, Passover, when Jesus died, was supernatural. You are not going to see an eclipse that matches that. More specifically, Jesus did not die on a Friday. So if you're looking for April 3rd, 33 AD because there was an eclipse that happened that day to provide darkness, you're wrong, because he didn't die on a Friday. So that automatically disqualifies that as having to do with anything. He also didn't die in 33. And we're going to go through that to show why not 30 and why not 33. But that's what the purpose of this video is. So we say, okay, people can say 12 AD fine, but for the purpose of reckoning this timeline, that wouldn't work anyway. So we'll just go with what a normal person would say. He reigned on his own from 14 AD, the 15th year was 28 AD, and yup, that's 3.5 years prior to where we understand it should have ended based on Artaxerxes and Nehemiah 2, and counting 69 periods of 7 on a 360-day calendar. So we're not going to dispute that, okay? If I had a preconceived idea, which I didn't, but if I had a preconceived idea, then I would have to get over some cognitive dissonance to accept what I'm being shown. But that would be my problem, not the mathematical problem. And so that's what I would challenge people is to, if you have cognitive dissonance about this because you believed for so long it was something else based on what other people were telling you, and yet when you do the math and it winds up being something else, I would honestly just encourage you to stop trying to make something fit that isn't fitting and understand why it's not fitting. Well, because it's not right. Literally, the only reason people think 30 or 33 AD is because of signs in the heavens, some kind of eclipse in both of those years. But if you actually look at the details of that, neither day that the eclipse occurred upon was a day that Jesus would have died on, because he didn't die on a Friday. He died on a Thursday. And all you have to do is do this. Nisan 10, Sunday. Nisan 11, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Okay? Nisan 12, Nisan 13, Nisan 14. Oh, Nisan 14 was on a Thursday. And it tells us specifically that Nisan 14 is this day that Passover celebrated. So therefore, anyone saying that Jesus died on a Friday take you about 5 seconds to know that that is not a true statement. I understand that traditionally we celebrate Good Friday as the day that Jesus died. That is a tradition rooted in not true truth. Wednesday evening. People go to church on Wednesday evenings because Wednesday evening was the Last Supper, celebrated in the upper room. That's what Wednesday night church services are a remembrance about, is the Last Supper celebrated on Wednesday evening before the Thursday Passover. Jesus died during the day hours on Thursday, Nisan 14. And he was in the grave 3 days and 3 nights, which began Thursday day, and then Friday night, and then Friday day, and then Saturday night, and then Sunday day, and then Saturday night, and then he rose toward the morning hours of Sunday. So it all works out, but it's precise. It's easy. It's not meant to be difficult. We complicate it because we have preconceived ideas that we take into this study, and we don't let the information speak for itself. We try to fit square pegs in round holes, and it's not intended to work that way. So what I have here is a reference point of the life of Christ and how it relates to the data points that we are given so that we can ascertain the year that these things occurred in, along with how old he was. So I have this chart in black and white, and it goes Nisan, Tishri, Nisan, Tishri, Nisan, Tishri. Because Tishri 15 was when he was born, but Nisan is the month that he died in. He began his ministry on Tishri 10, but he ended it on Nisan 10, 3.5 years later. So I alternate times of year. Now we have Jesus' birth here, we have Herod's death here, and we also have one of the most central data points necessary to understanding Luke's comment in Luke 3:23, Jesus beginning his ministry about 30 years of age. Now that specifically is a reference to Jesus being of an age to assume the role of a priest in the priesthood, to enter the priesthood. And that goes back to Numbers 4, where it talks about how all the Levite priests between the ages of 30 and 50 were eligible for priesthood. So what this is telling you is, no, Jesus was not a Levite, but what it's telling you is that he was entering ministry as a priest in an intercessory role. Jesus was not the high priest of the old covenant. He was the high priest of the new covenant. We learn about that in Hebrews 8. So he did not become the high priest until he died, because Hebrews 10 talks about priests having something to offer. It's necessary for priests having something to offer. And if Jesus was a priest on earth, he wouldn't have anything to offer, except he offered himself, putting away the old covenant, becoming high priest and royal priest of the new covenant, specifically after the order of Melchizedek, and beginning to build the spiritual temple as the chief cornerstone. So what this reference to Jesus being about 30 years of age is talking about is it's his eligibility to enter the intercessory role for the people, not as a Levite, because he wasn't a Levite, he was from the tribe of Judah, and not as a high priest, but as a priest would do to intercede between man and God on behalf of the people. So that is what the whole about 30 years is talking about. He was not 30 years of age. He was not 30 years old. It's telling you that he was of an age to be eligible for the position of a priest, which goes back to Numbers 4. So just to clear that up. So if anyone assumed that we must see that he was 30 years old on that date during that time, you're going to be upset. You're going to be disappointed, because that's just not the truth of it. So we don't actually, at this point, I didn't actually know how old he would have been. I just know that he's going to be at least 30 years of age, because Numbers 4 says between 30 and 50. It says he was about 30 years. So then we understand that there's going to be a reference point with regard to Herod when Jesus was born. When did Herod die? Well, there are your people who say 3 BC and 1 BC because they are bent on their signs in the heavens. Herod dying in 3 BC or 1 BC, and Jesus dying in 30 AD or 33 AD are 100% people trying to use natural eclipses of a sort to explain supernatural phenomena. Herod, according to every reputable encyclopedia or even Wikipedia or anything that is just telling you a date will tell you 4 BC. And they'll even get more specific and they'll tell you Adar 15 of 4 BC, which I think is such a fascinating concept because Adar 15 is Purim. And Purim, if you go back to Esther, was all about them trying to annihilate the Jews. What did Herod do? He tried to annihilate the Jews on account of killing all male babies under the age of 2. So yeah, it's totally apropos that Herod would die on Adar 15 because he was trying to do exactly what that type and shadow was in the book of Esther. And obviously Purim is still celebrated in Israel, Hebrew culture today, Jewish culture today. So it's so fascinating that people try to use the signs in the heavens, which aren't relevant, when they should really be using the typology of Purim to understand why Herod died on Purim, because he was an evil guy who tried to annihilate the Jews. Read the book of Esther. That's why. It's actually quite ironic. But if you go to any source that is just trying to deliver information, that is not trying to equate it to all of these signs in the heavens and, having secret special knowledge, they will tell you that he died on Adar 15 of 4 BC. Adar 15 being the month of March. Month of March 4 BC. Now, Jesus could not possibly have been born in 3 BC because that's after Herod would have died, and clearly Herod wouldn't have been bent on killing someone who wasn't yet born if Jesus hadn't been born. So you can automatically eliminate, if and since every reputable source is going to tell you that Herod died in March of 4 BC, you can eliminate Jesus having been born anytime after that as a possibility. And you can even eliminate 4 BC as a possible. You can eliminate 3 BC right off the bat and 1 BC right off the bat too, and any date in AD. You can just totally eliminate those as possibilities, regardless of what signs in the heavens people are bent on believing. Because Herod needed to have been alive when Jesus was alive too. But it also eliminates 4 BC as a potential year of Jesus's birth because it still would have placed Jesus being born after Herod died. So Jesus would have had to have been born before March of 4 BC. We know that he was born on the first day of Tabernacles, so he could have potentially been born on Tishri 15 of 5 BC, but that would have put him at about 6 months of age. And it wouldn't really fit with the understanding that Herod had all male babies 2 years and under killed. So the assumption would be that Jesus was born on Tishri 15 of 6 BC, making him 18 months old when Herod died, which would be much more appropriate for that scenario. So if we assume that Jesus was born on Tishri 15 of 6 BC, thereby making him a year and a half old when Herod died, and underpinning the male babies 2 years of age and under being slain, then you go to the historical record and you say, okay, well, clearly that's going to put Jesus way over 30 years of age by the time he begins his ministry. So I say, okay, if Jesus was born on Tishri 15 of 6 BC, then he would have been 18 months old there. And so this is where I started filling in the years. So in Tishri of 5 BC, he would have been a year old. So I count the years starting on a Nisan to Nisan calendar. I just count the years and I count his age in each of those years. And I put his year, so the years, I'm using a Nisan to Nisan calendar. I realize that the Jews use a Tishri to Tishri calendar. I don't care, that's wrong. I'm not doing that. I'm reckoning the years on a Nisan 1 start basis. Jesus was born in the month Tishri. So 6 months into every year. That's when his birthday would have been. So Jesus was born in Tishri. 6 months later, the year changed. 6 months later, he had his first birthday. So every Nisan, you're going to have a beginning of the year, and every Tishri, you're going to have a birthday for Jesus. Okay? So we keep on doing that all the way to the part where he would have turned 30, which would have been in Tishri of It would have been Tishri 15 of 25 AD. So that also tells us that Jesus would have began his ministry 5 days before his 33rd birthday. Tishri 10 of 28 AD, and he would have turned 33 on Tishri 15, 5 days later. So that puts him over the eligible age, within the eligible age of between 30 and 50. Like I said, we go back to Numbers 4 as a reference point. But how do we get closer to the about 30 years? Because that's going to be important. It's going to tell us that there was something that happened after Jesus was born to begin a count. And that would have been approximately 3 BC. That from this point of, say, Tishri of 3 BC to Tishri of 28 AD would have been 30 years. So was there something that happened here that began a count of 30? And I have this here is 3 BC to 28 AD is 30 years. So what happened here? Okay, well, there's a story. You go back to the book of Matthew, as most people choose Matthew over any of the other gospels for this, but it gives the most information specifically about this scenario. But it talks about how when Jesus was born, the wise men came to see, and then Herod got upset, and the angel came to Joseph, told him to flee. So they went to Egypt. And then the angel told them when it was safe to go back, and they took the long way. If you go back and you just Google how long approximately that journey would have been, it'll tell you about 3 years. So you can say, okay, well, this would have been approximately the time then, if you say approximately 3 years to get to Egypt and then come back, taking the long way and settling in Nazareth, it would have been approximately this time 3 BC when they would have come back. But there is a specific verse in Matthew 2:23 that tells us that when they came back and they settled in Nazareth, it says, and I quote, and this is pivotal. I'll explain in just a moment why it is pivotal. Matthew 2:23. And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. So approximately this time here is when he began to be called the Nazarene. Now the reason that's so important is because Jesus was prophesied in the Old Testament to do specific things as the Nazarene, as the branch. Anytime you have a prophecy that refers to Jesus as the branch, you have a prophecy that refers to this as a starting point, not his birth, but to them resettling in Nazareth and him from that point being called the Nazarene. Nazarene translates to Nazareth in Hebrew, which is what the word branch means. Anytime you have a reference to Jesus as the branch, case in point, Isaiah 11. There shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, a branch, capital B branch, shall grow out of his roots. Okay? The Spirit's going to rest upon the branch, and it's as the branch that it talks about he's going to come smite the wicked with the breath of his lips and slay the wicked. So it's using this as a reference point. His settling back in Nazareth and growing up as the Nazarene as a reference point. Okay, here's another prophecy. The prophecy of the branch building the spiritual temple. So it wasn't on account of being born, it was on account of him becoming the Nazarene that he was prophesied to do things as, to go into ministry as the branch, to die as the branch, and to build the temple of the Lord as the branch. Zechariah 6, the prophecy of him building the spiritual temple. Speak unto him, saying, thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying that, behold, the man whose name is the branch, all in capital letters. He shall grow up out of his place, Nazareth. Matthew 2:23 is your starting point. He shall build the temple of the Lord, even he shall build the temple of the Lord, and he shall bear the glory. He shall sit and rule upon his throne, and he shall be priest upon his throne. The prophecy of the royal priest. and the counsel of peace shall be between them both. So that's talking about him putting away the works of the old covenant, specifically to start the new covenant, to become the high priest, the royal priest of the new covenant, and all that he was prophesied to do to begin building the temple of the Lord, the spiritual temple, to become the chief cornerstone and to begin building the lively stones that comprise the spiritual house, was prophesied to begin when he assumed the role of the Nazarene, the branch. He became the Nazareth. So this is why I look at this and I say, okay, yeah, Jesus was 36 years old when he died. Okay, he was 33 when he began his ministry. But when he began his ministry, he was 30 years into being the Nazarene. And it was as the Nazarene that he was prophesied to do all of those things, to go into ministry, to lay his life down, to build the spiritual temple under new covenant, all of that. The precursor, what's the word I'm looking for? The prerequisite of all of that was that he was to do it as the branch. The branch is the Hebrew word Nazareth. You have a verse in Matthew 2:23 which tells you beyond doubt when he began to be the branch, began to be the Nazarene. After they left and fled to Egypt, after they came back and took the long way, when they settled in Nazareth, Matthew 2:23, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene, Nazareth, branch. So this is where I come to this, and I understand that people have preconceived ideas. They want to see 3 BC for Jesus's birth or 1 BC for Jesus's birth. They want to see 30 or 33 AD for his death. And this is all based on a misunderstanding of what the about 30 years is a reference to. It's not his age. It's from the assumption of the role of the Nazarene to the beginning of his ministry. And the assumption of the role of the Nazarene happened 3 years after he was born, when they settled back in Nazareth, after Herod died, and after they took the long way back. So this stuff is all independently researchable, but you have to throw aside what you believe you're going to see and be prepared to see something other than that. Herod died in 4 BC, specifically March of 4 BC. He died on Adar 15 of 4 BC. Go research Adar 15 and Purim and understand why that would make way more sense for God to use as a type and shadow or as a repetition of prophetic pattern than a sign in the heavens, an eclipse, which has no bearing on anything. But because people are so signs in the heavens driven, they cannot listen to common sense. They have to say, well, no, all of the sources say this, but I have new and special information that says this because of a sign in the heavens. No, that's not right. Okay? It's not. So that is what the last part of this chart is all about, is the life of Christ and explaining the birth of Jesus respected to Herod, the Nazarene, why it's important, and that it was from this point to the beginning of his ministry that was approximately 30 years. Explaining what the about 30 years of age is about at all. It relates back to Numbers 4 and about his eligibility to enter the priesthood. And then from this point, Tishri 10 of 28 AD, 28 AD being respective to John the Baptist and the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius from Luke 3.5 years later. And I've gotten people telling me, where in the Bible does it say Jesus had a 3.5 year ministry? Okay. I'm not going to even dignify that with a response, so don't even ask it. Okay, thank you. And then triumphal entry, Nisan 1032 AD. And then his death, resurrection, his ascension, and then Pentecost and all of that. And yes, that is approximately, 2,000 years. Not quite to the day from his ascension, but 2,000 years all the same that we